Hello, and welcome back to Dr. Hollowed. We hope you're having a good day. In today's topic, we're going to be taking a look at the creepiest and most paranormal encounters from U.S. military personnel. Please be sure to like and subscribe to support us.
My grandpa was in the Navy in the Vietnam era. He and his crew were in Panama for a brief stay, and he was told to guard a pier with another man to look out for guerrillas. He was given a gun that wasn't loaded, because if he shot someone that was attacking him he could cause an international conflict. So he and this other man started from the middle of the pier and walked in opposite directions and would meet back in the middle every 10 minutes or so. My grandpa was on the half of the pier that went further into the water, while the other man would go to the beginning of the pier that connected to the shore and nearly went into the jungle where guerrillas were known to frequent. It was about 30 minutes before the end of his duty, when my grandpa arrived to the middle of the pier alone. He waited for a few minutes but the other man didn't show to meet him there. My grandpa walks to the end of the pier and back twice, manning his post. The other guy never meets him in the middle again, and when the two other men show up to relieve them, they said they didn't see the other guard either. My grandpa later found out that the man had fallen asleep while walking the pier and fell into the water. He was found alive and put in the brig. My grandpa never saw him again. This took place on Fort Carson Army Base, Colorado Springs, Colorado in the summer of 2011. I'm a civilian, so not accustomed to the military life, but I have an odd occurrence from being a contractor on nearby military bases. This was strange but not as mysterious as most of the top stories. So I'm working on an army base with two other individuals, doing invasive weed surveys at known locations where specific invasive species have been mapped in ArcGIS for several years. The area we were at was a small grassy field next to the parking lot of a veterinarian clinic on post. The three of us are doing our vegetation surveys for a couple hours in the afternoon. We are all staring at the ground, counting plants and identifying each species. We are in between a road and the parking lot, so we see traffic coming and going. At about 3:30 the veterinarian clinic closes and there are only 2 or 3 vehicles in the parking lot. We assume the employee are just finishing closing up, and sure enough we see 2 ladies come out the front door and then leave in their vehicles. So the only vehicle is our own work truck. As we are slowly making it through this arduous task of cataloging invasive weeds, specifically at this site field bindweed was the nuisance, an SUV drives into the parking lot and then backs up into a parking spot near the end of the building. One guy in army fatigues jumps out and runs up to the building to open the door and prop it open. The other guy gets out and opens the cargo area on the SUV. Then the 2 men in fatigues pull another guy, who appears to be unconscious, out the back of the vehicle and carry him onto the building. We couldn't see into the back of the vehicle due to being on the other side of the parking lot. All 3 of us saw this and look at each other like, WTF did we just see? About 10 minutes later another vehicle comes into the parking lot. It's a Toyota Prius, so we assume it is the personal vehicle of whomever is driving. And this guy in civilian clothing gets out and walks up to the side entrance that the other 2 men carried their unconscious comrade through. We were perplexed and trying to understand what we just saw. We had no idea what could have been going on. Just a note to any readers, there was a huge hospital on the base and it was less than a 1/4 mile away from our location, so we really could not understand why an unconscious man would be taken in through a side door of a veterinarian clinic, after hours, by 2 other men. I was in the Navy as a hospital corpsman. My last duty station was Charleston, SC, Navy Hospital. I think it was on a weekend, because my XH had our kids for the day and my BF and I had gone to see the movie Identity, which was new in theaters. If you haven't seen it, it's about some people who get stuck at a roadside motel in some bad weather. There's more to it than that, trust me, but it was enough to give me a bad case of the heebie-jeebies. That night, I had overnight duty at the hospital. Now the hospital was in its final years of service and was mostly abandoned. The very top floor, 10th, I think, was the operating room, the 2nd floor was the administrative, CO suite, and the 1st floor was just clinics. There was no inpatient service there and absolutely nothing on the other floors. I was on duty, I think from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. with one other person, and we were the only 2 people in this huge, abandoned hospital just a couple hours after one of us watched a scary movie. Every hour, on the hour, I had to make rounds, which was taking a flashlight in the elevator, and walking around each floor, making sure it was empty, nothing was on, nothing was dripping, etc., and then moving on to the next floor. I did the 10th floor. It was fine. 9th floor, got out of the elevator, listened for a minute, and then got back in. Somewhere around the 7th floor, something scared me. I don't remember what it was. Probably a mouse. I still had to do the rounds, but I was so freaked out and panicked, and I had a radio to radio my colleague, but he wasn't answering. Which just added to the creepiness factor. So by the time 6 showed up on the elevator, I just opened the elevator door, made sure there was no mass murderer standing there. Good, on to 5. That was the quickest finished rounds I'd ever done and still would not wish that on anyone. The hospital was, still standing last I checked, but is no longer in use. My colleague found it howlingly funny that I was so freaked out walking around an abandoned hospital at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Oh, and there was a back door that was known to anyone who worked there that was always open and unlocked 24/7. Anyone could have totally come and gone and not been noticed by the duty watch because they put the duty crew on the wrong side of the building. I was stationed in a bad morale TRADOC unit and they had an M113A2 that was haunted. They used to take trainees out for rides during their field training at the end of basic until Flipper struck. You could spot Flipper from a mile away since it had flipped so many times they welded a special handle on the front to winch it back over. So Flipper earned its name and killed a few trainees and wasn't right ever since. The oil was always contaminated, it didn't matter what we did, that shit would look like milk in less than 24 hours. The controls were sluggish and would respond, oddly, for no apparent reason. Flipper would sit in the motor pool, ours was a blacktop about the size of a football field due to all the equip we had, and you would see Flipper out there segregated from all the other tracks covered in a tarp to try and keep the oil clean. It never worked. No one liked going near Flipper, and would only pull PMCS if ordered to. As I said, it was odd, the engine ran shitty no matter what the mechanics did to it and it wouldn't shut off like it was supposed to, it would keep running, blowing thick black smoke. United States Marine Corps, I was an infantry machine gunner. My first tour in Iraq back in '05, my unit was stationed at a dam in Haditha, 10 stories high and 10 stories below. We occupied all of the above ground levels as living quarters and offices and only 2 levels below, the -2 was for interrogations. Anyways, we had heard that beyond the second sublevel there were chilling sights and that this place was a known area where Saddam would torture people. One night me and 2 of my friends say fuck it, let's just see what the -3 level has, from there we'd judge if we would go further down. We spotted a bloody handprint that dragged across the wall, someone's shoe left behind, and a whole lot of mess. It was kinda creepy but not too bad, I wasn't scared, yet. So we walk down the hall and decide, hey, let's climb this ladder, go into this room and have a smoke. At this point it's about 1 a.m, the only other Marines awake should be those on guard at their posts and no one should be anywhere near us, or looking for us. Well, while we were smoking and joking someone coughs out loud but it wasn't either of us, we got real quiet, thought maybe it had been some officer or SNCO, that could hear us or smell the smoke, and was trying to catch in an unauthorized area, so we waited silently. One of us did a recon on the hallway we came from, no one was there. At that point we were like, yup, let's get the fuck out of here, climbed back down the ladder and walked out the back way to make sure there wasn't anyone else playing a joke on us. Well, it was just us 3 on the 3rd sublevel. Earlier that deployment I had told some of my other friends we should try to venture to the last sublevel, but after this incident I never went back to the sublevels. I don't think my friends did either. Went to Iraq thinking IEDs were the scariest thing I was going to encounter, nope. Never active duty, but I grew up a Navy brat. I lived in Ikago shortly after they built it, and one part actually was fenced off with signs that it was an active minefield. A friend of mine lived in one of the houses across the street from this field, and used to throw rocks over the fence trying to set one off. Eventually he snuck in and found out it wasn't actually a minefield. In the middle of the lot was an old blown out house. Around it were a number of graves with crosses and one Star of David made of scavenged wood. I remember it had a narrow sort of moat dug around it that was about a foot wide and 3 feet deep. I kind of felt bad and wouldn't cross the moat, but my friend was a bit of a dick and stomped around on the graves. Later on, an MP told me that a group of soldiers got held out there for a while, with few survivors. He also drove us down an access road on the side of the field, far past that to another part of the base that was unoccupied. There was another similar fortress made of fallen trees propped up against a stone outcropping. It still had a machine gun mounted in a gap in between the logs. Not sure if it's creepy to others, but it was really creepy to me at the time. I don't know why they said it was a minefield, and didn't just tell the truth. I'll tell you a story that I heard from my father, now deceased. He was a career Air Force air traffic controller, Trakin, Rubcon, all that shit. Made Chief Master Sergeant, 24 years served. He was a no bullshit kind of guy, hard but fair, and I never in all my life knew him to exaggerate a story, or weave a tall tale. We were on a trip together a few years after he retired, and I had Coast to Coast AM on, Crazy Paranormal Alien, radio program. He tells me that while on duty at either March AFB or Edwards, can't remember which as this was a while ago, He had something crazy fast on the scopes doing all kinds of things that shouldn't be physically possible, that they cross-verified with other units as not being equipment failure or an anomaly. Next day some LTC they didn't know rounds everybody who was on shift, the CCTLR and OIC, and pretty much tells them that nothing happened, they didn't see shit and to forget it if they valued their careers. As a side note, he was involved with the testing of the SR-71, stealth fighter, and both stealth bombers. He spoke about that at length when the aircraft were declassified, and even brought me some models that the Lockheed and Northrop Grumman guys used to give out to the airmen and shit as promotional items, I guess. He was pretty clear in telling me that this was not that. He said that he was pretty sure that it was a UFO or something. I don't know what to believe about it, and I'm not really into that subculture, but I know my dad, and he was clearly at a loss to explain that night. I was about 1 month from getting out of the army, but was lucky enough to catch one last staff duty. This unit didn't have a runner, so I was alone on duty. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, I left the desk to do my security checks. There was a long row of connected hangars, well lit by street lights. Just as I step into the light of the first street light, it clicks off. Whatever, I thought as I checked the doors and started heading to the light of the next set of doors. Again, just as I reach the light, the lamp clicks off. I try to laugh it off, but it is late and I am tired. My mind starts racing with all kinds of strange possibilities. I check the doors and move on, telling myself that I'm being paranoid. Now as I approach the third street light, I've calmed down and figure it is just a coincidence. Nothing to be afraid of. Except, again, just as I reach the light of the third street light, it clicks off. Fuck you. I hand my knife out, surveying the area, scared to death. Normally I am rational, but 3 a.m. alone, next to nowhere, not my manliest moment. Was at Camp Leatherneck, Helmand Province, Afghanistan. Was leaving my room, was a large room with 8 other guys, to head to the designated smoking area, smoke pit, around like 10 p.m. so it was dark and clear skies. Lit up my cigarette as I was passing through the T barriers, and when I got on the other side I saw about 10 or so Marines/Army looking up at the sky pointing. Looked up and saw 3 red dots in the sky. About the size of what you'd see on an airplane, but far apart in a triangle formation. So one light at each angle point. Sorry, I'm trying to explain and it would be so much easier to draw lol. So we're all looking up and a second set of the lights appeared a little to the left of this set. It was super weird, and at one point the lights from the first set got closer together, then apart again, then completely disappeared. Still to this day don't know what it was. Really cool to witness though. Nothing paranormal and nothing too creepy either, but during deployments to Afghanistan, I think pretty much all personnel went through Kyrgyzstan, Manas Air Base. The boundaries of the base are soft and mostly was just fencing. You could see Ray Navy forests. The place looks like what you think of when you think Transylvania. On the way from the airport to THR base, there are a lot of old Soviet-style gray buildings. I specifically remember thinking to myself, if I wanted to torture someone, this would be the place to do it, in one of those buildings. Lo and behold, when the whole CIA torture thing came out, one of the locations they tortured terrorists at was near Manas Air Base. I probably looked at a building where some sorry asshole was being waterboarded or stuffed into a cupboard. Not that I particularly cared, but yeah, that's my bit. I don't know if paranormal, but it for sure falls under creepy. It was 1999, I was an 18-year-old fresh out of 8 and moved to Fort Carson as my first duty assignment, got my barracks room, assigned to 2nd Platoon, and everything in my army life was moving great. It comes to Friday and we have our safety brief, and one of the senior E4s tell me after formation to come over to his room for some after work drinks. I was 18 so it was not allowed, but who cares, people are getting to know me, I can have a beer and it won't be an issue, the army is great. So I go get in my coolest lucky jeans, and button up short sleeve shirt, God I was lame, and walked over and knocked on his door. What I was greeted by was the creepiest thing I have ever seen. 9 members of my platoon were watching porn, and all still in uniform. Just sitting there drinking, watching porn together. No one was naked or doing anything weird, just 9 grown-ass men in uniform still watching porn. They passed me a beer and asked if I could join. I told them I'm underage, I'm going to have to pass. They told everyone I was lame, but I will never forget the look of lust in their eyes watching that movie, and I have no idea what happened after I left, nor did I never bring it up again. Coasty here. Once on the cutter we had a major fuel leak in one of the engineering spaces. So we did what we are trained for and prevented a fire. During the cleanup is when it gets weird. Myself and a subordinate are tasked with opening the valves and starting the pump to suck up the fuel and water in the bilge. Simple stuff, done it hundreds of times. We put hands on all the right valves and the bilge waste is moving to the right waste tank, even had confirmation from a guy watching the tank levels. All was good. Suddenly I blinked extra long for no reason, my focus blurred and I get a call on the radio from the guy watching the tank levels. The 8 inches of fluid we put into that tank is gone and suddenly in the other tank. What the fuck? My valve alignment is golden, and I followed the operating procedures like I have too. I go over my valves to triple check. They are aligned for the other tank, valves I specifically remember not touching and 30 seconds ago teaching my subordinate not to touch for this task. We correct the valves and start putting fluid back into the right waste tank. Okay, back to normal. After we save the day, the 3 of us get together to compare notes on what went wrong when pumping the bilge. When I got to the part where I blinked extra long and vision got wonky, the other 2 perked up and said the same thing happened to them. Fuck, what the? We started to ask around to see if any other crew members had the same experience. Everyone said no and looked at us funny. Okay, this is a story a former colleague from the German army, the Bundeswehr, told me on one night after a patrol shift when we got drunk, and it still creeps me out cause he's one of the most reasonable and down-to-earth guys I've ever met. Just some context for the international readers. The German Bundeswehr is part of the KFOR, the Kosovo Force, a peacekeeping force that entered duty in 1999. One of the stations of the German forces was the so-called Prizren airfield. My colleague, back when he was a Unteroffizier, was stationed there several times. On his last time, just 2 or 3 weeks before his flight back to Germany, he was on his way back from a delivery tour with a younger guy that just arrived in Prizren. So they drove with a Wolf, a Bundeswehr Mercedes-Benz G, when they saw bright light that was glowing behind a small hill. That was pretty unusual because they were right in the nowhere surrounded by patches of a forest between Prizren and Dojnes. The thought I could be a plane crash, a camp of bandits or something, but they didn't know. So they stopped and started climbing the small hill when they heard a strange noise that sounded like the noise of a transformer at a substation. After they reached the top there was no plane crash, but they did see some kind of craft that was landed between the trees. My colleague described it as a upside down a bowl made out of silver or another shiny metal with 3 or 4 tiny legs that was, he did not how to describe that, glowing from the inside. Right behind the craft they some people, or better, humanoid creatures in tight suits that were walking around like they were searching for something. One of them held a device in his long hands that looked like a metal rod with a glowing light on its top, that started flashing after some time. Then one of the other beings knelt down and maybe took a sample of some plant or something. Right after that, all that happened in maybe 1 or 2 minutes, they boarded their craft through some hatch or door. Then the craft that started hovering over the ground. After that, my colleague said that they started feeling strange and ill and just fell asleep. They woke up an half-hour later laying on the ground and staring at the sky. The 2 thought they were crazy and could not believe what they saw. They walked down where they saw the craft and the beings and found some marks of the legs on the ground but nothing more. Of course, they did not report this event cause everybody would think they were crazy. I got to my first unit in the army after basic combat training in 8. A buddy from basic got there at the same time and we were put in the same room. The building was about 3 years old, so it was modern, 2-bedroom, shared kitchen on the left and bathroom to the right. My room, back and to the left, homie's room back and to the right. His door had this official US Army crime scene tape around the edges. Being curious fresh privates, we asked the senior specialists what it was about, to which they would just skirt around any kind of answer and fuck off. Fast forward a few months, homie moved to his platoon's hallway, and my Navajo buddy from basic moved in. By this point the crime scene tape was removed. He's a traditional Navajo, fairly spiritual type, and starts telling me he getting odd feelings from the room. I tell him I'm kinda creeped out by it because of the tape, but I'm not terribly worried about it. Fast forward again, probably about a year in the same room. Homie is at an early morning appointment as I wake up to do my pre-PT grooming. His door is slightly cracked, which is unusual for him. His toothbrush is left by the bathroom sink when he usually keeps it in his room. I don't think anything of it, he must have been in a rush. I do him the solid of putting his toothbrush where it usually sits in his room and leave the door in the same position as I found it, about an inch open. I go back to the mirror to start my shave when, in the reflection, I see his door slam open, slam closed, slam open, and finally cracked about an inch where it started. I immediately left for PT and took the ass chewing for not shaving.